What you see today is a situation where impunity has been licensed, and even though they say that we are in a civilian regime, you find that it was actually safer to speak the truth during the era of the military than it is today. The basic hallmark of any democracy is the rule of law. There is no rule of law in Nigeria. It's the rule of men, the rule of impunity that governs Nigeria today. You see one that the GO or the other visiting governors in the north. When they are sharing the gbemu, are you and I there? We are not there. Christians are being murdered wholesale. Have you heard any one of these Father GOs speaking against it? The Igbo man is better equipped than any other Nigerian to cope with our current circumstances, where the government has become completely useless. The Igbo man was already prepared for the uselessness of the government. So now that he is prepared for it, and everybody else have now decided to stigmatize the Igbo man, I can't blame the Igbo man for turning around and saying, it's none of my business. Oh. If you say the Nigerian custom is useless, the Nigerian police is useless, the Nigerian judiciary is unfit for purpose, the Nigerian army is ineffectual, why would you expect that the Nigerian media will be any different?
The Nigerian state mostly.
That's a billion-dollar question.
Hi guys, welcome to another interview episode of Selahmeditate. I'm Benzik, where we discuss pertinent topics that will cause social change, impact your mindset, and help you to take action for good. And today I have also, once again, my erudite guest, Mr. Dele Farotimi. We're going to be discussing on issues bothering us in this country. In this particular episode, we're just going to go all the way back, coming forward to the present and issues surrounding us, the future and the way forward. And it's going to do justice to this particular topic. So guys, most of you may have known Mr. Dele Farotimi. May welcome my very powerful erudite guest, Mr. Dele Farotimi.
Thank you for having me. Thank you
for joining me on this episode once again. And firstly, sometimes I just want us to get this out of the way before we get into the topic for discussion. Sometimes people address you as a lawyer, an activist, and all of that, but sometimes you say you're not an activist. So I want you just clarify it. How do you like to be addressed? Is it as a lawyer, an activist, or who is Dele?
Look, when we begin to offer specialist togas, then we are mystifying whatever it is that we seek to do. My name is simply Dele Farotimi. I once earned my living as a lawyer, but I don't do that anymore. So I'm just Dele Farotimi, another Nigerian. And I think that should be good enough. People can then decide whether what I am doing is something that they are not qualified to do. If I see evil and I speak to it, and on account of that, you want to call me a social critic, it means that we should all become social critic. If I am seeing another person oppressed and I speak to that, and you want to say, oh, he's a civil rights activist, then it means that everybody in Nigeria should become civil rights activists. It's just a simple thing. I am just another Nigerian. I'm not doing anything that any other person is not equipped to do. And when you now begin to ascribe special toga to that, you mystify it and make it seem like it's something no other person can do. Open your mouths and speak your own truth in your own space. So all these social rights activists, human rights activists, I don't covet those titles, and I decry them a great deal. If we were in a place where we could claim to be citizens, I would say I'm Dele Farotimi, citizen of Nigeria. Unfortunately, we are not citizens. We are all more or less victims. It's a function of whether we are aware or unaware of our victimhood. But we are simply victims, no more than that. So my name is Dele Farotimi, and that should suffice.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for clarifying that. Now, I want us to go a little bit back and explore from history, a little bit of history. Because in this our era, history has been distorted a lot, and people just try to count it in different ways that they feel they could. I wanted to explore Nigeria's leadership landscape, tracing it back to its evolution in the years and identifying factors contributing to the prevalent issues that we have? Because currently now, you said, and I remember our last interview, we discussed something around Nigeria has been bad already from the beginning. So I want us to start pinpointing at those points, those specific instances where we started getting it. Is it from the British rule? Is it when we started a democracy? Is it when military dictatorship came into the point? At what point those eras do we start from? Because some people will say history will say it's from the British rule. Some will say it's when the military decreed Nigeria. Some will say it's when it's the present crop of leaders that we have. At what point did everything start deteriorating? I just want us to go back in history time a little bit.
Well, I'm not an historian, so to say, but I am a student of history.
Exactly.
I try to, as you have said again, I try to figure out exactly where things went wrong. The Yorubas have a proverb. They say that Tomo ba baton, aba roba. It means that even if you were not told the history, you must at least to a very large extent witness the contemporary happenings in your space.
Yeah.
And what I can say is I was born in 1968. That was during the Civil War. So I grew up in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. And I grew up in Ibadan. And as I was growing up, it has become apparent to me that I'm living in a very troubled country. And so I became curious. And as God would have it, I developed a flair for the arts growing up. So I was a student of history and I was a student of government in secondary school. And I did a fair bit of political science in the university, and I was also compelled to study the constitutional history of Nigeria. So, and Nigeria is a relatively young country as it is, so it wasn't so difficult to begin to unearth our problems. And what I found is that the most intractable of our problem is the loss of the sovereign will of the people themselves. What is the sovereign will? In any organization or association, the people constituting such associations would ordinarily be the ones who would write the rules by which they wish to be governed. Whether it's the Hunters Association or Alaba Market Traders Association or Ijo Development Union or Haneze or any organization for that matter, the members who are free to join or free to exit would have decided by what rules they wish to be governed. And in most cases, they will codify these rules and they will refer to it as a constitution governing that association. So I looked to the Nigerian situation and I realized that the last time the Nigerian people could be said to have exercised their right to self-determination was back in 1963, when we had the Republican Constitution. That Republican Constitution of 1963 evolved, and it evolved first from the fundamental disagreement of the Western region led by Chief Obafemi Awolowo with the Richard Constitution of 1946. It disagreed with it because it was generally a unitarist constitution. It did not take into account the multiplicity of ethnicities and nationalities trapped into this space called Nigeria. So it kicked against it, and series of conferences held, both in Nigeria and in the colonial office in England. And eventually you had the 1954 Constitution. I believe that would be the listening Constitution, which more or less evolved a federal Nigeria. And that federation was what was preserved and codified into the 1960 Independence Constitution, which recognized very clearly that we were different peoples who have agreed to come together, and each was allowed to grow at its own pace. And this was what led to the formation of the Western region, the Northern region, and the Eastern region. This regional federalism held sway up until the independence in 1960. By 1962, this same constitution allowed for the creation of a fourth region, the Midwest region. Before that region was created, there was a plebiscite held in what became known as the Midwest.
Yeah.
That was the sovereign will of the people freely expressed. They agreed to create the Midwest. When the plebiscite had passed, the Western Region Assembly passed the motion by more than 2/3, sanctioning the creation of the Midwest region out of the Western region. The Federal House of Representatives in Lagos equally took the motion, and it passed by a 2/3 majority. So you saw the sovereign will of the people expressed from that of the citizen at the local level where the region was being created. You saw it expressed in the Western Regional Assembly. You saw it expressed equally at the Federal House of Representatives. And the Midwest region was created. And this was gazetted, and it became part and parcel of the 1963 Republican Constitution. That constitution was what was in operation up until the point of January 1966, when the January coup took place. That was the last time the Nigerian people expressed their will. From that moment up until this, what has happened is that the will of men who have the capacity to deploy force have prevailed over the Nigerian people. And it is not by accident that Nigeria has moved from sanity into the normalized insanity with which we live today, because the will of the people have not been allowed to prevail. What happened in the last election is a clear example of just exactly how little the will of the people count in Nigeria. So you find the state itself structured to ensure that the voice of the people is silenced. So if you ask me, how did we get here? I'll say to you that it was when we got lost in 1966. I wasn't born then, but Yorubas will say, Tomo Babaton, as I said, Abaroba. I didn't see what had happened before I was born, but I read the history and I have witnessed some. I've seen enough contemporary events to know that that was the root of our problem. It doesn't mean that we were in El Dorado before then, but at least the will of the people prevailed before then.
Now, if you are to look at least you must have experienced some military eras before down into democracy. How do you compare during military era and then the democratic rule we're trying now?
It was easier to tell what was evil. The lines were clearly drawn. I was a student in the university all through my university, primary, secondary, university education. I had only a 4-year experience of civilian rule. So my entire youth was spent with military dictatorship. But even under the military dictatorship, Nigeria saw more development and people had more rights. The courts were more just. The institutions were more honorable, even in the year of the military. What you see today is a situation where impunity has been licensed, and even though they say that we are in a civilian regime, you find that it was actually safer to speak the truth during the era of the military than it is today. The Nigerian police was not as depraved. The courts were not as corrupt or perverted. You still saw a lot of brave judges and justices during the era of the military. That was when we had the Akinola Agudas of this world, the Justice Esho of this world. That was when we had the Okuta. We had a lot of upright judges back then, but now, what do you have? We say we are in a democracy, but it is anything but a democracy. The basic hallmark of any democracy is the rule of law. There is no rule of law in Nigeria. It's the rule of men, the rule of impunity that governs Nigeria today. So it is it's like comparing apple and pineapple.
So will you say that, will you think that military will coming over will be better for us?
Look, the military is part of the society. You're talking about a time when the military had ideals, when they had aspirations to be better. The Nigerian military today is no different from the Nigerian ruling class. There is no difference. Reality is that today, you have a military that is being given more money than it has ever received, and yet insecurity is at its peak. You have a Gumi opening his gob to tell people that to tell government that if you don't negotiate with bandits, you won't have peace. What is that? The only reason he can say that is because he knows that the government and the bandits are twin brothers. So it's not about bringing the military. I will never advocate military rule. Because the only thing that will happen is that now we can even talk and say that what they are doing is not good. Yeah, we must also be cognizant of the fact that these ones would not send uniformed soldiers. They will send their hired killers, Agberu and everything. But under the military, you can simply expect one sergeant, no name, unknown soldier to knock your door, and then you disappear. That Yatta has disappeared for how many years now? Nothing has happened. So I'm the last person that will advocate military rule, but it's obvious something has to change. We are not in a good place, but not military rule. It's the people themselves who have to find their voice and find the will to demand better from their government.
Now we're gotten to this stage now. We're talking about the law, not giving justice, and the whole system being messed up. Should we bother about 2027 election? The
fact of the matter is we cannot vote our ways out of this mess. If you're talking 2027, there is always going to have to be some level of confidence building. In 2019, I wasn't interested in voting in any election. Ditto 2015, because there just simply isn't any credibility to the electoral process. But by the time they brought the amended Electoral Act of 2022, there was a critical section which made electronic transmission mandatory. But the joke that we call courts in Nigeria today more or less wrote that out of existence and decided that the result is whatever INEC says that it is. So how can I bother myself to go and be voting or campaigning to vote in 2027 when I know that it is the like of Wike that is selecting resident electoral commissioner? I had to deal with INEC in Lagos State on behalf of Peter Obi's campaign and the Labour Party. And I know that Segun Agbaje, that is the rec in Lagos, is essentially a decrepit man with no credibility. To get them to even release electoral result sheets was a problem. I had to pay rank Xerox to bring their machine to INEC so that we could make photocopies. And yet, they refused to make the form EC8A available to us. We were stonewalled throughout. Those are the ones that will now conduct another election in 2027, and I will now go out and say I'm going to vote. What vote? Or is it when a robber tells you bold-facedly that go to court, which was what INEC told people because they knew that the courts had already been compromised. And I said that full-chested. The courts are compromised. We don't have courts of justice in Nigeria. So how do you then advocate elections? This is part of why it has become apparent that at some point something has to give. If we cannot vote out bad government, if we cannot aspire to have good leadership, if we have found ourselves in a situation where we don't even have a say, our votes do not count, why are we talking about 2027?
Then what should we do?
Well, it is up to the Nigerian to decide what to do. I am not shy in making clear that we cannot vote our way out of this. When the Nigerian is good and ready, first thing they will need to do is they will stop the petty bickering. Is Yoruba, is Igbo, is Fulani, is that. They don't care what you are if you are a member of the reigning class. Akpabio is not neither Yoruba nor Igbo nor Fulani. And yet, it hasn't stopped him from leading the pack of thieves who call themselves the Senate. We're talking about a Senate that is they are the ones saying it. I'm not a member of the Senate, but members of the Senate have come out and they are alleging that, oh, various figures are being bandied around. And they are not talking millions. They are not talking billions. They are talking trillions. They are talking more money than was voted for both health and education as having been used to pad the budget. Why do you pad budgets? And then you can't even get clarity. That's how opaque the finances of the Nigerian state have become. We can't even get clarity as to exactly what the figures are. Figures are being bandied around. That gives you an idea of how united they are where they are doing the stealing and sharing. But the victims are the ones who are busy bickering, abusing themselves, attacking each other. So how do you then give such people any common cause to pursue? The first thing the people, until such a time as when the people are done dealing with their differences and uniting, anything I'm saying or suggesting will be me whistling in the wind.
Now that comes the challenge, that comes the major problem, because I'm thinking how we're going to do it. Is there going to be any time that we're ever going to come together? Because it seems like when you go to the north, their ideology and their way of thinking is totally different from people of the south. How do you be able to bring all this? The reading class, like you said, are together. How is it really possible to bring us together?
One of the errors we all tend to make, especially those of us who presume to think that we are wise, we imagine that we can pick the time and place when the people will come to the knowledge of their common afflictions and then cooperate to then decide that we are chasing out these ruiners. Fact of the matter is that we have no such capacities, and I do not pretend to have it. All I know is that you are either going to play dog or you are going to play God. You play dog by drawing attention to what is wrong, because all a dog does is to bark. Or you play God by affecting the situation to change the situation. If I have the capacity to change a situation, I act to change the situation. When my capacity to change the situation is constrained by one reason or the other, all I can do is draw the attention of others to the problem that I am seeing. What I am doing on the national stage is to simply draw the attention of others to what I am seeing. I own no guns. I do not belong to a political party, although I try to take part in political actions. But the capacity to speak to the truth of what I see is not diminished and is not constrained by the fear of any man. So I will say what I have seen and I know to be the truth. What others do with that truth, it is entirely in their hand. But posterity would record that at least one of them did not do anything to normalize insanity. I'm speaking to what I see. What people do when they do it, that's their business. It might very well be that they do nothing, but I know that this system is unsustainable. At some point, it will gridlock itself. It might be that 2027 when the class that has sat down together and are busy sharing everything together, you don't hear anything until they start quarreling over the sharing and the looting. It might just be that when 2027 comes, there aren't enough offices to share within that class, and then you find a gridlock. And then don't forget, the funny thing about humanity is that we never learn. Abatwigwe had all the money in the world, more than he could have spent in 20 lifetimes. Today, is down in the ground. All these men of power that you see today, they will go the way of all flesh, as would I, as would everyone who will be watching this as well in this time. But when we are all gone, the one thing that remains and cannot die is the truth. The truth that we are speaking today will be heard by generations that are coming. And when they hear these truths, they will ponder these words and perhaps use these words to find their way back to sanity. So let those pimpish men of power today who think they will live forever, who are busy amassing billions and trillions, let them keep amassing it. And then let's see how sustainable the situation would be. The only thing I know that I am particularly interested in doing is avoiding a conflagration based on ethnicity.
That is where the problem is, because that cannot be avoided. It's looking as though the ideology from the north and the south is totally different.
I think we should be careful when we say it is true that we have these differences.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. But what is the north? Is Benue the north? The people of Bokos in Plateau State, are they part of that north? The people of Taraba, are they part of that north? The victims in Katsina, because the people of Kankara are also part of that north, and they're actually Fulanis in Kankara. The people in Katsina are predominantly Fulanis as well. Are they part of that north? In Zamfara, where people cannot move from one city, one town to the other without carrying Kalashnikov to keep themselves safe, is it part of that north? What we are seeing is a fragmentation of a state imploding without those who are responsible for the state even caring. So yes, you would have pockets of violence, but the pitched battles that were based on ethnicities and ethnic nationalities, I am not sure you would ever see that again. For instance, in Yoruba land, you have the Yoruba Ponus and the Yoruba Ronus now. In Igbo land, you have the Biafrans and you have those who are more focused on economic Biafra. I doubt that if you hold a referendum in Igbo land today, asking people whether they want to break away from Nigeria, I would not be surprised if those who choose to remain in a restructured Nigeria are by far more than those who are asking for the breakup of Nigeria. That is because we've become integrated over time to a very large extent. Even the greedy bastards ruling us, pardon my French, they don't care about ethnicity or religion in their conclave. It is the poor for whom they have weaponized hatred that focuses on these things. You'll see one Daddy GO or the other visiting governors in the north. When they are sharing the Gbemu, are you and I there? We're not there. Christians are being murdered wholesale. Have you heard any one of these Father GOs speaking against it? They will not.
And that's true. But is it one of the reasons? I remember the last time you said for the past 5 years you've not gone to church. Why did you stop going?
Look, the Bible is very specific. It says, where two or more are gathered in my name, I'll be there, right? A man stands behind the pulpit. I know from my experience with him that he's an inequitable man. How can I possibly sit under his ministration and be lying to myself that he's a man of God? The Bible is specific. It says, by their fruits you shall know them. What is it about the Nigerian church that is suggestive of godliness? You build fantastic structures. You profess the name of God, and yet your works are no different from that of Satanists. So I'm not going to church. There are some good churches. I would say that every day of the week. There are men of God still in this town. I'm sure there are. But look around you. What is it about our country that is suggestive of a space governed by love or with the fear of God? So I don't want to make this about religion, but I am simply not a religious person. I'm a Christian, but I'm simply not religious. I sit with persons of like mind who equally have the Spirit of God in them. I have a couple of friends who are pastors. When I feel like once in a while, like the Chapel of Glory, Pastor Ayedogbo, Sam Ayedogbo, I go to his church from time to time when I feel like attending church. It's not all, but a vast majority of those who claim to be God, to be men of God, they're actually gods of men. There is nothing about them to suggest that they are even familiar with God any longer. Some of them, if God called them, that was years ago. They can't even recognize the voice of God any longer because they are more attuned to the voice of this age. They pursue money, they pursue power. They can't hear from God any longer.
Now, now I remember one of your posts, and I saw a lot of people on social media. You were reading courses on INEC and all of that. Do you think there's going to be any effect to such courses when it looks at people like that don't even believe in things?
Let's be clear about something. If you've ever trained dogs, or if you've ever kept dogs, you'll notice that one of the first things you do, you take a rag, you drag it on the floor so that it chases after the rag. You are teaching the dog how to hunt. You are teaching it to unearth its natural reflexes. When I said, let's cuss out Yakubu, it is possible that in the collective voices of Nigerians with their grievances, the heavenlies might very well hear our voices, but more importantly, that exercise was designed to teach the people to focus on their enemies instead of focusing on each other unnecessarily. Because of that particular exercise, if you see I'm sure you saw just how many people joined in. One thing that is undoubted is that now there is a focus on INEC. We focus the people's mind on the putrefaction within INEC and the persons within INEC responsible for that putrefaction. It becomes easier to layer on that by the time we are now saying, you know what, let's demand the removal of the INEC chairman, or let's demand that the judiciary, not even that the legislature, make it mandatory in very clear language that there must be transmission of result from the polling unit level.
You made it clear the last time.
There was sufficient room for ambiguity. Ambiguity, see, when somebody wants to be mischievous, Yorubas will say, don't catch a man here. If you catch a man at his elbow, he simply straightens his hand and he escapes. Catch him here. When you hold him properly, if the judiciary had mandatory sections of the Electoral Act, not subsidiary rules made pursuant to the Act, which was what they did, INEC made subsidiary legislation rules pursuant to the Electoral Act and then denied its own rules. The court elected not to hold them to those rules because it was convenient for the fraudulence to be allowed to sail through. Do you understand? So that is different from when you now have mandatory provisions clearly saying that you must transmit and we must see it on IRF real time. Those are two different things entirely. But when we come to the subject of INEC, we'll deal with it. But the entirety of that exercise was designed to build solidarity, to build common purpose, to focus the people's attention on the real problems and to help them properly identify the enemy. That was the totality of that. Now, if people say curses don't work, then they better make sure they've not done anything to deserve the curses. Because there is power in the tongue. If I have not done anything to you and you are cursing me out, you're wasting your time. But when I have done things to provoke the curses, let the person say curses don't work now. No problem. Let them go and look at the one that is sat in the rock at Mina. With all the monies he stole, with all the powers he had, let them go and look at him and then pray that they become like that in their own old age as well. If they say curses don't work, let them look within their own community. There is power in the tongue. Yakubu will spend that money, but he will spend it only to heal diseases and all sorts of afflictions. The sword will not depart from certain households. Those are not curses, they are affirmation, because these persons have invited the curses upon their own heads. But for me, it was simply an exercise of solidarity building and to train the people to focus on what is important.
Now, if you look, you observe some pockets of violence in some places. You see some in the north, you see some the southwest. So what's your take? What do you this calls for the division we're talking about? What's your general take regarding the countenance of some of the Igbos? They will say, don't join any protest, don't follow them to do any form of fight. This, that, we are not part of it, we are not part of that. Rather, some of them will be saying, well, let's go with Tinubu and all of that. What do you think regarding that disunity, regarding bringing people together and to do something at once?
Look, when you have a situation where there is a concerted effort to stigmatize an ethnic nationality and blame them for everything that goes wrong, and that ethnic nationality in response now say, okay, you know what? So that they will not say that it is we who are causing problem. Please stay out of any wahala that is being orchestrated. I can't blame them. If the Igbo man is saying, I don't have any problem with Tinubu, I'm not part of any protest against the government, I can't blame them for saying that. I grew up in an era where whenever there was any problem, the first thing people did was to loot. And who are the people who lost when shops and markets were looted or burnt? It was the Igbo, because those are the merchant, that's the merchant class in Nigeria. Long time ago, when Nigeria had not become the evil forest that it is today, it was just in his infancy at that time. The Igbo man learned that the government has nothing for him. So he learned to survive on his own. You will rarely ever find an Igbo man applying to the civil service or looking for a salary job. So the average one, even the ones I went to university with, they will go and attach themselves to somebody in the market. They will learn a trade. So they learned to do without government. They learned to discount the government completely. Which means that the Igbo man is better equipped than any other Nigerian to cope with our current circumstances, where the government has become completely useless. The Igbo man was already prepared for the uselessness of the government. So now that he is prepared for it, and everybody else have now decided to stigmatize the Igbo man, I can't blame the Igbo man for turning around and saying, it's none of my business, oh, enjoy your government. He didn't enjoy anything from the government before. So for somebody, and I'm talking about the average Igbo man who is like me and you. I'm not talking about the Ojius or Kalus of this world or the Okorochas of this world who have always fed on the grievances of Ndi Igbo and made money by appeasement of government and then presuming to speak on behalf of. I'm not speaking to those ones. I'm speaking for the average man on the street who grew up believing that he has no portion in Nigeria, which was what fed the Biafran spirit and the demand for Biafra even 50 years after the Civil War. So I'm not speaking to the man on the street of Ala Igbo. I'm not speaking to the trader in Alaba or at Aspanda or at Ladipo. All those ones, they have always lived with the mentality of being victims of the system. So when a victim of the system is telling you, leave me out of your protest, go and deal, because it wasn't gaining anything from the system in the first place. So if he wasn't gaining anything from the system in the first place, he has nothing to lose if the situation becomes... The only thing that is happening now is that more victims are being recruited into the Nigerian mess. So why should he, who was always a victim, further victimize himself by joining those he believes are responsible for his victimhood? Unfortunately, it only assures the victimization of everybody. Yes, exactly. But it is now incumbent on those of us who know better to help him to understand that, yes, we understand that that was yesterday. But for us to all come out of this together, you would have to move away from that pain to now walk. Now at least everybody is now suffering. Yorubas will say that it means that until suffering is democratized, it is not possible to end it. The suffering in Nigeria has now been democratized. Long ago, I predicted that the Nigerian revolution will start in northern Nigeria. The only reason I said so at the time is because The North had always been the reason we could not find common purpose to fight the evil. Exactly. But now that the person in power in the presidency is not a Northerner and is at best a nominal Muslim, and the suffering has now been fully democratized, the northern street, I'm not talking about the northern elite, the northern street has no interest in forbearing and continuing to suffer. Why is it that all of a sudden everything that they tolerated during the years of Muhammadu Buhari is no longer tolerable? Have you considered that? Look, I don't know how long it's going to take, but if this mess continues, the problem that will consume this government will start in northern Nigeria. It's not going to start in the east. The Igbo man has more or less taken a position. I was always a victim. Go and solve your problem. Leave me alone in my little corner. If you lie, steal all the money in the world, you still take that money to a market to go and buy something. And who will you find in the market when you get there? You find the Igbo man there. Whether it's food you are buying, whether it's building material, whether it's car, you find the Igbo man is there in the market waiting for you. So he's already in a position of advantage. So why would he disadvantage himself unless you people show him a readiness for change? So that is where we are right now. It might seem like nothing is going to happen, but something will definitely happen. This system is not sustainable. Now, what do you think, generally? I remember in your book, you talked about the Nigerian media becoming the first to reckon with in the past. What do you think is currently the problem with the Nigerian media? Are they projecting the truth, or they are doing all they can to support the ruling class? Because some of these things are supposed to be projected from them down to the north, some of them that are not very wise and all of those things. But are they part of the ruling class, or what do you think? They say, àìsàn tó ń ṣẹ̀gbẹ̀fà, òun ló ń ṣọ̀ọ́dún, àìsàn tó ń ṣàbọ̀yàdé, gbogbo ọlọ́ya ló ń ṣe. What ails one ails all. If you say the Nigerian custom is useless, the Nigerian police is useless, the Nigerian judiciary is unfit for purpose, the Nigerian army is ineffectual, why would you expect that the Nigerian media will be any different? The same madness that has afflicted the society has not escaped the media. Who owns the media these days? The media is largely owned by the persons ruining Nigeria. That means that they are the ones the people ruining Nigeria are the ones shaping the narrative. They are the ones telling us the story. Bola Ahmed Tinubu owns a TV station, at least that we know of, outright. He owns a publishing house outright. His proxies and other members of the ruining class equally owns media houses across the line. So why would you expect them to educate the people? There are two basic ingredients and characteristics of feudalism. And Nigeria has become a feudal state, if nothing else. The first is the weaponization of poverty. The second is the weaponization of ignorance. So to weaponize ignorance properly, you have to control the information that the people get. So when you have a situation where almost all the media houses in Nigeria, unless you're dealing with the independent media houses that are largely internet-based, they are in the hands of those who have destroyed Nigeria. And they are not about to educate the people to help them understand that they are the reasons for the affliction of the people. So to watch Nigerian television stations these days, or to read newspapers, you would even think that Muhammadu Buhari is the only reason why everything is this bad. If you had read those same newspapers during the years of Muhammadu Buhari, you believe that it was Jonathan and the PDP who destroyed Nigeria. So you find that the preferred narrative is the one that shifts attention away from the actual problem. Whether you are watching TV, whether you are reading newspapers, that is what you will get. Which is why you find that the government is particularly interested in controlling social media. Because in that way, they would then have the capacity to put forward a single narrative. Social media makes it very difficult for the government to control the narrative. So when you look at the Nigerian press, do not expect the Nigerian press to be any different from other strata of the Nigerian society.
But many of them are independent for themselves.
Independent to do what precisely? Independent to promote the truth?
The truth, yes.
Are we talking about the social media or the TV station? Well, you can say they are independent, but independent to what purpose? If they are truly independent, how much of the news do they really carry? Self-censorship has become the order of the day.
Is it deliberate?
Of course it is deliberate. It furthers the agenda. The preferred narrative is what they put out there. And it's not just the TV houses or the radio houses or even the print media. It's the practitioners that are in there, working there. How compromised are they? They are part and parcel of this same society. The TV presenter is not going to come from Ghana. He's a Nigerian. And he's a Nigerian open to the same temptation as any one of us. Fisayo Shoyombo brought forward his investigation of the customs. How much of that do you find on everyday TV stations? How much of it are you reading there? It is a function of what the press elects to report. When the press is compromised, either because whether because the organization itself is compromised or whether because the editorial team has been compromised, what you find is that what you put out there is the preferred narrative of the men of power. So the Nigerian press is afflicted by the same problem that, in fact, it's not just the press. It's easy to focus on the press. How is the Nigerian mechanic or the Nigerian carpenter or the Nigerian doctor? Each and every strata of our society has been compromised. We've built a country on lies. It's always easy to point at the head of state or head of the reigning cabal or the governor or the senator. But we all need to be looking in the mirror, because if these are not people reflective of who we are, we will not be where we are. They are reflective of us. They speak to who we are.
We have some of them online, like on social media, that are not supposed to be parts of the ruling class or the press. Maybe some of them that have news, but you see them propelling or pushing forward false narrative, like people like Reno Omokri and co. You see them pushing out some kind of...
Do they benefit from the putrefaction? It is up to the individual to determine the content of his conscience and whether his conscience is for sale or not. I generally look to avoid personal attacks. Unless a person is occupying public office and his person is influencing or has influenced the decision he has made, which affects me as a victim, I would rather not speak to persons. I speak to systems. And what I am saying is this: an inability to understand the temporal nature of the lives we live, an inability to understand that a day will come, however rich or powerful you might be, you will die. And then focus on the verdict of posterity. An inability to do that almost always lead a man to pursue narrow interest. And in the pursuit of narrow interest, you sacrifice the public good. So a man might decide that it is in his better interest not to speak the truth that he sees. I remember one of the gentlemen that you will call a social commentator, who once said that the day you join the APC, you forfeit the use of your brain. But the same man is today an apologist of the APC and for the APC. The Reno that you mentioned was the first to start. He went to Chatham House, if I remember, organizing public protests, banging drums and everything, chased Tinubu out of London. Today, he's busy offering explanations on behalf of the same man that he labeled a criminal. What has changed? Interest, selfish interest. So when you find a lack of consistency, you must look to personal interest. In some cases, plain hunger. There is brother Femi Fanikayode there, but I'm speaking to them only as types. And these are the ones you know. What about the vast majority that you know nothing about? You can even look at those ones and say, okay, unenlightened selfish interest is propelling them. What about victims who gain nothing from the system and are actually victims of the system? But they are the ones who are constantly helping to validate evil, to normalize evil, to explain evil, and to even stigmatize you who would dare to speak against that evil. What do you say about those ones? They've never met Tinubu in their lives. They will never meet him until they die. They gain nothing from the system. But they are the loudest clapperboard when it comes to supporting evil. What do you want to say about those ones?
It's interesting. Now, I want us to look at our problem differently in this other way. Some people will say maybe because of colonial powers that try to benefit from the enclave that they put together, the North, South, and all that they put together. Do you think we have not been really free from this code of colonial power? I think I get that reason, because I don't think it's because of greed or selfishness that's making our leaders to continually do what they do.
Stop using that word leader around me. Does this country hold anything suggestive of leadership? Call them rulers. Just call them rulers so that we will not be having this unnecessary argument. They are not.
Our rulers. I don't think it's greed or selfishness that's making them to do what they are doing. I guess there are other powers, which is colonial power, that is trying to ensure that the country is subjected so that every resource they can benefit from it. I guess that is where I'm trying to see. What you are doing
is that you are trying to find a rational explanation for an irrational situation. What you are doing is not like when the all-knowing atheists who do not believe in the existence of God seek to now rationally explain to you who believes that God does not exist. Let's be clear about something. There would always be national interest, and then there will be personal interest. The British interest does not coincide with a Nigeria that is working. American interest does not necessarily coincide with a Nigeria that is working. That is the truth. How much more money do you think they make from exporting petrol to us after they've imported our crude? It makes more sense for them. It creates jobs in their country. It gives them forex. So, but that is them. I don't blame them. Yorubas will say that no, there is nobody who will not take advantage of the foolish. That we are foolish enough to be incapable of recognizing what is in our own enlightened selfish interest as a collective is not the fault of the foreign powers. I don't blame them. Is it their fault that we are foolish? It's not. If we truly have leaders, it means that those leaders would have clarity as to the vision with which they are leading the people. If you are leading a people, you must have a destination to which you are leading them. But in the absence of leaders, with the enthronement of rulers, pimpish men without imagination, because to have vision, you must have imagination. In the absence of imagination, you cannot envision, because a vision is never born of what you can see. What you can see might trigger the vision, but you are not going to be aspiring to get something that is in your physical environment. If you are looking to build a revolutionary or a visionary train system in Nigeria, you will not be building the kind of train that we have built that take 2 hours 40 minutes to get to Ibadan. You wouldn't do that. You will be thinking of something that will take 40 minutes from Lagos to Ibadan. So you are thinking of a bullet train or something better. But you are building something that had existed since the 50s. Even in the 50s, they were building trains faster than what we are building now and plunging the country into national debt. Or you want to talk about their rail system in Lagos, where they built 7 kilometers or thereabout in 16 years. What is visionary about that? So it's not the foreign powers. I don't blame them. Every country must recognize what is in its own enlightened selfish interest, and sometimes it is not necessarily enlightened. But look at the British. Because of the destruction of our own educational system, do you know how much we send to Britain every year in school fees? Do you know how many Nigerians have sold their substance so that they can japa? The Nigerian middle class has been wiped out because of the stupidity of the Nigerian state and its ruiners. The net beneficiary of specialist, well-trained labor that is draining out of Nigeria every day, Britain, Canada, Japan, now Australia. All over the world, Nigerians are to be found, and it is the best and brightest of us that are living. And when they live with their substance. So we are losing people, we are losing resources. America has never sent its troops to come and conquer us. Britain has stopped sending any soldiers here to do anything. When was the last time they said they've given us independence? It's easier to actually keep us here and let us be the ones who pay for our own passage to slavery, which is what they are doing. So I can't blame them.
They don't have any influence in ensuring.
Of course they have influence, but why should they spend their influence making our country better? That's on us. We are the ones who have the duty to recognize the fact that we can be better than we are and then aspire to be better. We can't wait on anybody to come and do it for us. What's their business with us? If we elect to be foolish, we can't put that on them. That's their own problem. Whether their society would eventually benefit from this on the long run. Look, go to Britain today. You'll find multiple enclaves where the Muslim community has overtaken the indigenous community. Sharia law is being demanded. Those are the payments for the evil that they have done. Do you understand? There would always be consequences for every actions and inactions. But you cannot blame them for our own refusal to identify what's in our own interest. That our rulers are foolish. That the victims have demonstrated an incapacity to recognize common cause and come together as one. That's not their business. They are exploiting our foolishness for their own gain. Whether that gain will be long-term or short-term, or whether it will implode in their faces eventually, is another ball game entirely. But I would not sit down here and focus on blaming some extraneous forces when our own lives are in our own hands and we are the ones who have elected not to do the right thing. That's not on them. That's on us. That is completely on us. It's not on them. Yes, there are foreign interferences in Nigerian affairs. Yes, they have acted multiple times to affect the course of our history. Yes, they've done that. But how long are we going to keep blaming extraneous forces? When are we going to accept responsibility for our own failings? I can't blame them for our stupidity. It's not their fault. The sheep could see and imagine how foolish Raimi was or is before collecting the yam that is in Raimi's hand. You understand that? It's not their fault. They are completely blameless as far as I'm concerned. Before I will turn around to blame the British or the American, I must look in the mirror and admit to our own collective failure to recognize what is in our own enlightened interest. There is no point in blaming them if we've not accepted responsibility for our own failure. When we have come to admit to our own failures, then it becomes easier to deal with the foreigners who are equally responsible for where we are.
Wow. Now, what do you suggest when it comes to, let's bring it back home now. What do you suggest, since the laws are not working and systems are not working? Should we start rebelling against the system, or what do we do?
It is up to the oppressed to decide how to end the oppression. I have never been shy in pointing out the fact that, one, our current trajectories are unsustainable. We would have to turn around at some point. Two, the absence of a plan for the day after is what leads to chaos, and it is what leads to anarchy. The difference between the revolution and anarchy is the plan for the day after. What do you want to do when the system ends? I have never been shy about what we should do when the system ends. And what I have always done is try to make sure that the people can recognize the commonalities of their own affliction so that they do not turn on each other in a orgy of violence. But to tell the people, go onto the street or stay at home, all that can only come when you have united them. When they've come to the point where they recognize that they are not each other's enemies, it becomes easier at that point to point them in the direction to go in pursuit of change. I am determined to see a changed Nigeria, but I understand that these things must happen in phases. What I am doing currently, my total strength and energy is being spent on looking to unite a disparate people, because the people are actually quite disparate. You just pointed at one in questioning me earlier on, the detachment of Igbo from the system. That detachment is not something that happened under Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It had always been there. That detachment was born of necessity. But one have to find a way to reconnect them. You don't do that by simply calling them to come to the street. To come and do what? You have to explain their enlightened interest that they will be pursuing in joining a common cause. So I'm very deliberate in what I'm doing. There will come a point where when I hope that we would have sufficiently united the people to the point where we can ask them to act in concert, north, east, west, and south. But until that happens, asking people to come and start protesting or doing anything to change anything at this point would only lead to anarchy. You'll find those who believe that our local fighting those they believe have lost out, conveniently forgetting that we've all lost out. So instead of focusing attention on what are we going to do, I have focused my attention on unite the people first. A united people are easier to mobilize or galvanize behind common cause. But a people who are still busy fighting each other in the mistaken belief that they are enemies, if you call them out, they will be fighting themselves. After EndSARS, in order to deflect attention away from the evil that was done under the watch of Jide Sanwo-Olu and Buhari, the first thing they said was that it was IPOB that came to bomb buses in Lagos. Wasn't that the mantra?
Yeah, that's true.
Meanwhile, it was factions of NURTW that were fighting each other, that were burning buses. But the story was that it was IPOB. So if you now call people out, that's part of why Igbo is saying don't call us into it, because they knew and that they will be the ones scapegoated. So until such a time as when you've allowed other people to understand that this is not a Yoruba Igbo thing or a Hausa Fulani Yoruba Igbo wahala, is a Nigeria. All of us are the Nigerians who are suffering in Nigeria. All of them are also Nigerians who are enjoying our suffering. Until we manage to get to the point where all those tribal differences that are being played up, religious differences, until it doesn't matter or has been minimized, you cannot call people to common action. And until you can call people to common action, you can't change anything. Our ruiners also know that. That's why they invest so much energy, resources, and time in fragmenting the people. They know. So those of us who are looking to change things also have to work deliberately to unite the victims. I'm focused on that.
Now, as we begin to wind it down, this what you just said now is going to be very difficult to achieve, which is uniting.
So, since when have the difficulty of a task meant that it mustn't be done? That is difficult does not mean it shouldn't be done. Even if we fail to do it, we would have left an example for others to follow, because it would have shown them the right path to take. That one might fail should not be the reason why one will not try. I have zero problem with failing, but let history not say I didn't try. You understand? Let history not record that I did not try. It might very well be that it is the history of your trials and failures that would inspire another generation. But to simply fold my hand and say that it will be difficult, so I'm not doing, that will be me failing my purpose. Whether I succeed, quote and unquote, or fail, quote and unquote, does not matter. As long as I have succeeded or failed in pursuit of truth, it doesn't matter. The one thing about the truth is that it doesn't die and it doesn't expire. If I stand behind the truth today and I fail in pursuit of that truth, somebody else will pick it up tomorrow because it wouldn't die. I might have died. Those who killed me or who resisted me would also have died, but the truth will continue to live. So it doesn't matter. We should stop focusing on instant gratification. There was a piece I wrote years ago where I said, I do not write for you. I wrote that piece from a place of frustration. I was looking for instant recognition of the truth by those for whom I was writing, by the generation, by my peers and contemporaries. And I realized that they were making excuses for everything that I was pointing at as evidence of our putrefaction. So I became frustrated. And then I realized that because of that frustration, I could no longer write. I couldn't write again because I wasn't happy that they were not responding the way I expected them to respond. Until it struck me, I am not writing for this generation. I'm actually bearing witness. And those who will come after were all long gone. They will read my accounts and they will know that, okay, this was where they ought to have passed and they didn't pass. Oh, this man said so at the time. So what should have been an account for a generation to examine itself and change itself became a chronicle bearing witness to what is happening in my time. So I might very well not be speaking to you or to even the persons in this generation in which I live. It might be their children. It might be their children's children. The important thing is that I must make sure that I stay completely true to the truth.
The Nigerian state was saving.
That's $1 billion question. Nigeria is potentially a first world country. If you fragment it and you allow the people to have free expression to their talents and capacities, they will flourish in their little enclaves, whether that's Ijebu Nation, Ijesha Nation, Bende Nation, Anambra Nation. No matter how many you fragment this space into, they will find ways to survive somewhat. But this is all I know. Nigeria, this was what I was born into. Like I said, in the cauldron of a civil war. This is what I have bettered my children into. Whatever you are going to do with this country, you must always understand that it is the people, not the construct. Nigeria itself might not be worth saving, but the victims are worth saving. Even if you are going to break Nigeria up, if you do not find a way to unite it first behind that purpose of breaking it up, they would have to fight to break it up. The civil war they are fighting in Sudan, have they finished fighting? The one that they have been fighting in, what's that country called now? Only one ethnicity, Somalia. Have they finished fighting? It's not about the Nigerian state. It's about the people. Whether Nigeria stays one or whether it's fragmented does not matter to me. I would prefer to see a Nigeria that is restructured to allow the people the right to self-determination, and let the people then decide whether they want to stay together as one or whether they want to go their separate ways.
Remember you said the Nigerian state is still fighting the Biafran War. Why did you say that?
Look, what is the Biafran War? The Biafran War is essentially a war of self-determination. That's what it is. What you see happening in Bokos is the Biafran War. What you see happening in Kaduna is the Biafran War. Everywhere you see the Nigerian fighting the evils of the Nigerian state, what you see is the Biafran War all over again. As long as the people's capacities are constrained, as long as their right to self-determination is constrained, the Biafran War will never end. The totality of the Biafran War is about self-determination, the right of a people to become, to be human, to be treated as citizens. That is the totality of the Biafran War. Do you think it's by accident that the last constitution that was written by the Nigerian people for the Nigerian people is the 1963 constitution? It's not by accident. It is not by accident. It is the loss of citizenship that has placed us in a situation where military bandits have been the ones writing constitutions for us. If the people have their sovereign will, which is the right to self-determination, they would have been the ones constituting the assembly of the people to write the constitution by which they will live. But other people have written our constitutions for us. It's not by accident that you can't even have an accurate population census. That is because the Nigerian is not a citizen, he's a victim. Some of us who are victimized by Nigeria are aware of our victimhood. Others are blissfully unaware, and they call themselves citizens. And they parrot whatever they are told without critically examining the truthfulness of what they have been told.
Now, I have two final questions for you, and one of them is, can we just look, can you give the account of, give Nigeria of old versus Nigeria of now, which Nigeria of 70s, 80s, what is the disease that makes it better?
There is nothing better, no. If you have a situation where you are constantly running away from the truth, you cannot expect to get any better. The further you walk away from the truth, the worse the situation becomes.
But it looks like then, as of 80s, 70s, things looks like it's
more because, now it takes time. Yeah, it takes time. So when you plant,
where we are now.
Do I need to tell you that? If you ask your dad, he will tell you about the good old days. My father spoke of the good old days. I am stuck here talking about the good old days. Does that not tell you something? I went to public schools. I went to secondary school in my mother's village, Fiditi. I went to primary school in Ibadan, public primary school. How many children attending those schools today are going to be able to hold their own against the system in the future? How many? When I came to Lagos in 1985 as a 17-year-old, I drove on that same Ikorodu road with its 3 lanes. Now Tinubu has taken 1 lane and turned it into a bus lane that is specifically only for buses that belong to private individuals, even though they are branded government buses. That road is today pockmarked with all kinds of craters. IBB built Third Mainland Bridge. He was a military dictator. Fourth Mainland Bridge that Tinubu has been building by propaganda for over 20 years now. Have you seen it? Things are growing progressively worse because we are moving further and further away from the truth. The less visible it becomes. So all this comparison of, I don't need to, you don't need me to tell you that things were better yesterday than it is today. That is belly aching, and I try to avoid doing that. It's obvious to everybody. It's audible to the deaf and clearly visible to the blind. I don't need to be the one to tell you that we are better off yesterday.
In all of this, where do you think this administration, where do you think we are heading this administration? Where are we going to? And what is the way out?
I don't know the way out, though. I won't lie to you. Nigeria has defied all logic. But one thing that is clear to me is that this is not sustainable. My only prayer and my efforts are simply directed towards making sure that we don't end up in a cataclysmic implosion. But that this system can be sustained, that's a lie. It cannot be sustained. Something has to give at some point. It's either we are going to find the will to change it peacefully. But if anybody is telling you that this can be sustained, the person is a fool.
We're not going anywhere.
No, it's obvious now. Do you need me to tell you? The last time we sat here, how much was dollar to naira? How much is dollar to naira today?
Well, thank you very much. What do you have at the final words that if you want to say what general advice to Nigerians?
My singular advice to Nigerians is very simple. Stop looking at yourselves as enemies. Your true enemies are sat in your governor's office. They are sat in the presidency. They are sat in the courts. They are your traditional rulers. They are your pastors and imams. Those are your true enemies. Look to yourselves and look in your mirror for your redemption. Stop waiting for those ones. They are cashing out.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So, that's it, guys. You've heard from our everyday guest here, Mr. Dele Farotimi, and I believe you have been really impacted and your mindset will be shifted regarding this episode. So it's left for us to go out there and act and cause change that will bring positive influence to this society. I remain your one humble Benzik. I'll see you again next time. Cheers.